I'm Zona Roberts, and I'm 90 years old. Last April I was 90 years old. And I am the mother of Ed Roberts, Edward Vern Roberts, and the mother of Ronald Walter Roberts, and the mother of Mark Leslie Roberts, and the mother of Randy Kurt Roberts. My 4 sons, yeah. There's a little Ed, tiny baby Ed, just beginning to walk. Ed, growing up, he was a great sports person. And at school, I don't think he learned to read till he was in the 5th grade. I knew he was bright, but somehow it didn't come across at school. He and his teacher said, but see that kid on the playground? He organizes the kids, they play their sports, and they're just going at it on the playground. The tragedy of polio that was struck us with a great blow, and this was before the polio vaccine. 14 years old, yeah, when that hit him. That's quite an adolescent time in a boy's life to be paralyzed neck down. He didn't know what could happen. He didn't know. We weren't around people with disabilities. We didn't have any idea of what life could be like living in an iron lung or a wheelchair or something. There was no role models around. The iron lung is a big, long metal tube. You've probably seen pictures of them. And it was terrifying for Ed to first be in the lung because they wanted him, but it would do the breathing for him. That's my mother, Nada, and that's Ed in the iron lung. He was a senior at high school along with his next brother, Ron. They were both going to graduate. So I went to his counselor to see about his graduation, what we needed to do, and she said, well, Mrs. Roberts, that's fine, but I think he should stay another year because, you know, he hasn't had driver education nor physical education. Yeah, I could believe that. And what has that to do with his academic, you know, has he completed his academic studies? Well, yes, but it would be good for him to make up those units by staying another year in high school. And I didn't think so. So then I went to see the principal of the school, and he supported his counselor that staying another year would be a good thing. In the meantime, the superintendent's office sent a man out to talk to us. And this big, tall man came in and he stood next to Ed's bed, and he looked at him and he said, "Now, Ed, you wouldn't want a cheap diploma, would you?" Well, again, the idiocy of this kind of comment. So then I went to the superintendent's office and talked to the superintendent, Tom Reynolds. And Tom Reynolds said, some people cannot see past the nose of the end of their nose, that they just don't see things in a big picture. So then the next thing was a big meeting, which would be decided whether Ed got his diploma or not. And when I got to the door of the building, the same man who had come to the house and said the cheap diploma sentence, he was standing there and he said, "Oh, Mrs. Roberts, we are so proud of your wonderful son." And I thought, you son of a bitch. I thought those words, and I thought, somebody has gotten to you, haven't they? And I walked in and I sat in the meeting, and the business of the school district was taken, and then came up this thing of Ed's graduation from high school. And everybody said, of course, Ed got his degree. So I stood up to thank them very much, and I burst into tears. I couldn't talk because it was over, and it was so. And I'd worked up, you know, to see if I would have to fight again or make up some kind of thing. And I didn't have to. It was over. So the tears, I can get a little teary thinking about it now because it was quite a moment in our lives. Later, many years later, Ed told me that showed him you don't just put up with things, you do something about it. He said that was one of the single best things that happened for him, to know that you can change things. You don't just put up with stuff, you do something about it. you know, whether you win or lose, but you do something about it. And then Ed started at College of San Mateo, which was our local junior college, because I could take him up there and then he could go to classes. It was at junior college where he had his first introduction to good political science classes, which became his forte. And one of the teachers there said, professor said, that Ed was the brightest political science student he'd ever had. After 3 years in Gene Worth's office as his advisor, we were sitting there about what he was going to do next, and Gene Worth said to Ed, who was sitting there, "And where do you plan to go now?" And Ed said, and I thought, what do you mean, where does he want to go now? What, he's home, we'll be there. I'll be there the rest of my life lifting him. Vern will come home from work and we'll put him in the bathtub and we'll feed him and everything, but he'll be there. And Ed said, well, I was thinking of UCLA. And I went, what? And he said, yes, UCLA has a program for veterans, and they have an accessible campus. They've put in ramps and things and made some classrooms accessible. And I thought, what? You were reading about that? I didn't know you even cared about that. And Gene Worth said, yes, Ed, that's very interesting, but I think that you belong at Berkeley. It has, it's kind of a better credential, and it has a wonderful political science department. And seeing as how that's your field, I think that that's where you belong at Berkeley. Then how would it be paid for? Because we couldn't afford to send him to Berkeley to pay for room and board in college. So we applied to the Department of Rehabilitation. In those days, the Department of Rehabilitation was a department that helped people, retrain people. If somebody lost a finger or something like that, it would retrain them to do another vocation. So it was kind of a vocational thing. So when they came to College of San Mateo and assessed that, they met with Gene Worth and Phil Morse and I don't know who else, and decided that Ed they shouldn't support him. There was no way they could justify using the money to support him to go to college, because what would he do? He couldn't work. He was paralyzed neck down. You know, how do you train somebody who has never had a vocation, and then what's he going to do? And this is one of my favorite stories. 9 years later, he's director of the Department of Rehabilitation for the state of California. 9 years later. I mean, that's now that's a story. That's a fairy tale come true. I think that my trust in his strength, I think, was one of the big things. And I think a lot of it was my background, because I had, through a succession of stepfathers and various kind of things in my life, I left home very early, and I worked my way through high school, living in people's homes, and was just kind of determined to do for myself. And I think that feeling of independence has just spurred me on through my life, of feeling that. And I do think that came off to Ed as trusting his strengths, knowing that he had a lot of abilities that sometimes weren't apparent, or sometimes maybe he didn't know he had them, but he had them and he could do it.